Welcome to the Casey Ingram Show, Meet Your Candidate series. No spin, no agenda, no endorsements, just the candidate. If you like the show, be sure to hit the subscribe button. I'm Casey Ingram. Let's get into it. Okay. Today, we are joined by Will Laughlin, candidate for Stuart City Commission Group 1, which is the seat held by Campbell Rich. Welcome to the show, Will.
Thanks for having me again, Casey.
Absolutely.
We did an interview 4 years ago, and I really enjoyed your show. I really enjoy the work you do. The community really owes you a debt of gratitude for the service you do.
I appreciate that. I remember you from 4 years ago. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. But let's start out. Just let us know, who is Will Laughlin, and outside of the political arena, what's your professional background and what motivated you to run?
Okay, pretty humble beginnings. I grew up in the middle of the cornfield, and I love small towns. The closest town was a small town about 6 miles away, and uh, being a great bass fisherman back in the day. At least I think I was a great bass fisherman. But when I came to Stewart, I got a call. It was an interesting story of how I came to Stewart, but to save you the trouble, I got to Stewart and I loved this small town and I loved the fishing here. I met right off the bat, it was just a small town feel. And the beauty of the small town is people are always friendly. And I met three guys who put me on these 20-pound snook, like almost, I think the second or third day I was in town. It was just crazy. I'll always be indebted to these three fellas, Carl, Ryan, and Joe. Joe since passed, but those were great guys. And then I discovered that was the third day. Then as time and the years went by, I discovered all these wonderful people here in the city of Stewart. And there's a lot of great people. And that's the beauty of small towns. You can bump into your friends and people and talk and then about whatever's happening. And I see that small town changing. So that's kind of tying into the motivation of why I run. I see the big developments happening. Many people saw the apartments, they didn't like it. And so I'm like, well, what are you going to do? Just sit back and just let it happen? And then to go to your other part of the question, what makes me qualified, I think, is I came as a school teacher. I'm very good at, well, I would like to believe I was pretty good, at least, with working with kids. Many of those students, there's mainly middle schoolers and these little terminators. They're becoming self-aware. And if you ever work with middle schoolers, and if you had one of those type of people, it's always a fascinating experience. No day is like the previous one. So you get to know you're more of as much as a psychologist as you are an educator, and then you try to figure out patterns within each individual, and you try to help them on their path. And I was lucky enough to have many smart, really highly intelligent individuals, and then many just flat out really good, hardworking people that went on to do tremendous things.
Now, are you still teaching?
And no, I got out of teaching 2008, and I started my own financial services firm. I recognize there's a big gap in the service market. Learned about that around 2000 when the markets were about to crash, and I was thinking about becoming a financial advisor. Chatted up a bunch of people, and they all had no plan. There's only one guy. I remember his name is Joe Murtaugh. He was a Morgan Stanley guy. He recognized that the markets were going to go down. He had all his people out, and he was actually short the market, which means
Good
you
for
profit
him.
when the stocks go down. But everybody else was just like, well, just tell your clients to ride it out for the long term. I'm like, you do see what's about to happen, don't you? Well, they didn't, and they weren't going to protect their clients. So I thought, well, let's try to develop an investment vehicle to act as a hedge against market declines. So I've been doing that, and then that helped me tremendously, I think, for this job, because now it gives me great insights into how some of these big companies work. And we'll probably talk about that later. And you can recognize major red flags as they're developing. And this one great short seller from back in 2000, a guy named Jim Chanos, says about this era today, this is the golden age of fraud. So basically beware. There's a lot of really bad investments out there. And so I think that between those two things, and then also I did some umpiring on the side. I do little side gigs. And being an umpire, it really helps you develop. I've developed lots of friends. It helps me, I guess, network. I know plumbers now, AC people, and great people, local people. I want to see their local businesses do well because, number one, they're really good people. And that's kind of what motivates me,
Great.
trying to help these people succeed.
Very good. Now, you answered it, but not directly. You've been in Stuart a long time. How long have you been in Stuart?
I moved here in 1993,
Okay,
so it's
long time.
33 years.
Yeah.
Seems like about 2 weeks ago. Where did the time go? I don't know.
Well, you've seen a lot of changes in Stuart then. It's before my time here, but I understand about that time when you moved to Stuart, it was a pretty sleepy town in that I think I've heard it described as you could roll a bowling alley down the street or a bowling ball down the streets. Not much happening.
Well, it wasn't quite that sleepy, but yeah, downtown Stewart was a little bit like that. But yeah, US 1, you could get from, US 1 and County Highway to Jensen Beach in 5 minutes every day or less, no problem, without, doing 60 miles an hour, even just the regular speed limit. And all the snook were everywhere. You could go anywhere, throwing a line, it seems like, and catch a snook. And there was a lot of 20 pounders back in the day. And now you're lucky if you even see a little rascal. It
Yeah.
seems all those big, uh, all the honey holes I used to have kind of dried up
They're
and
done.
disappeared. There's still some big snook out there, in fact. So, but anyway,
Little
so
hard.
yeah, I've seen a lot change. Yeah.
So why now? What specifically made you to decide to run for the city of Stuart and at this point, and why do you think it needs different leadership and a new voice now?
Well, I think I see there's a problem with people on the board currently, and particularly my opponent, who says one thing. He ran as a slow growth candidate, but then within a month or two after getting elected, he voted to rezone from a commercial to a residential. Okay, so he didn't keep his word. That 60 units at Selfish K, that's on Central Parkway, and then it was just this March when residents were complaining about how the traffic and the way the road is set up now with all the parking along the roads at Central Parkway, it makes it quote unquote undrivable. That is what these people were saying. And it's only going to get worse because of this Selfish K that they're currently building. Okay. Now, how are you running as a slow growth candidate? And then you're going to help promote these kind of projects. And then he's also identified that he's not against he didn't support, he voted against the city and their lawsuit against the state over Senate Bill 180. That's another red flag. So, and then there's a couple other key points I'm sure we might get into. But yes, that's what kind of motivated me. At first, I had been asked by several people back in October, November, December, hey, Will, you running? You're running? I'm like, no, I'm not running. I'm not running. I want to run. Been there, done that. Don't want to do it. I ran against Sheila Clark last time, and halfway through it, by the time it was all said and done, I knew all our people, and we are all laughing and having a good time. So the good people, I hate, politics is a blood sport. You got to be prepared to just knock somebody out. That's not really my style. And thought, well, I'm not going to run against Chris because I like what Chris has managed to accomplish. He said he was slow growth, and bam, he had like 3,000 units in the pipeline, shut it down. I didn't really want to run against Sheila because, kind of like, kind of friends, but it's like, all right, she's come around a little bit. I was kind of mad because she also, when Campbell Ridge made the motion to rezone from commercial to residential, she seconded. I'm like, Eula, that was your campaign.
Right.
You said that you had to respect, the owner's rights, and then you didn't have to rezone this, but she did. Then I've watched her, and then she's kind of come around a little bit and much more cooperative and supportive of the ideas that former Mayor Collins and current Mayor Reed and Commissioner Giobbe kind of have. This really trying to stop the excessive growth. But Campbell Ridge, said a couple of things in March that just said, you know what? I think I might need to get back into the race.
So it kind of sounds like what motivated you to run back in 2022 is the same motivations today. Looking back at that campaign, what did you learn from that experience?
Well, that last campaign, I jumped in at the last minute and I felt like I didn't know anything. I don't like to dive into things without knowing the background or a lot of research. I knew a tremendous amount about the macro world, the bigger pictures, from not just 60,000 feet, but satellite view way up there from following markets and doing investments and trying to do risk management. But I didn't know really a whole lot about the city of Stuart at that time. This time I know a lot more about it. I feel a lot more comfortable and I know the enemies at the gate. They're pounding away. They're ready to come back in. And there's people on this commission that are prepared to help them see their plans come to fruition. And they're very counter of what the people of Stuart want. So I'd like to see the people of Stuart have their will no pun intended, executed. And they want their will is to keep the apartments and the big development down, keep
Okay.
it all a nice, quaint, charming town. And I'm among that group.
And I was just going to ask, clarify who the enemies at the gate are, in your opinion.
Well, you have big developers. I mean, and you have big Wall Street interest. Okay, Brightline exposes this, and for private equity back in the day, you had well to save a lot of time. It's the private equity boys, and it's these Wall Street groups and subsidiaries of BlackRock and Vanguard. You see them here already. They were the ones that own like the Trillium Project behind all these, and then there's another development just north of, just in the Jensen Beach side of town, if you will,
Mhm.
the north of the Roosevelt Bridge, and there's others. So they're going to, and then with that CARE Act, I think it was Senate Bill 102, they wanted are they now are going to be enabled to have an advantage over local developers. Now, I happen to know a couple of local developers, and they're really great guys. They took me fishing way back in the day. They probably don't even, well, one of them probably doesn't even remember me, but it's like, these are really good people. They love Stuart. These are the kind of developers you want to support. They're not going to overbuild, I don't believe, Stuart. And we want to help those developers. They're going to get the pinch if we don't step in. That's just my opinion.
So, have your views on growth and development changed at all since your first run?
No, not really. Again, I love the small town. One of the benefits of the small town is that people tend to be nicer. They just are. You know your neighbors. You're more friendly. You tend to get along well. And even though I'm running against Campbell Ridge, I know him well enough. We're not friends, but he's got a certain sense of humor that I like. He's got a great family. The daughter's a great gal. He married a former student of mine who was a best of his class. So you get all these connections, and everybody kind of knows each other. But what I'm seeing here, start about 4 or 5 years ago, is you stop at at the intersection of Canner or US 1 or some other big intersection, and that light turns green, and you don't move within the 1/10 of a second. Somebody giving you the horn.
So true.
Okay, so the big city mentality is starting to creep in, and once you get into the big city mentality, then it shifts, and it goes dark in the sense that once you lose your connection with your neighbors, then you feel like it's a dog eat dog world. I mean, you can see it through out history. You can see it through all across the planet and the countries that have that mentality. So that's very dangerous. I don't want it. I don't like that. I don't want it here.
Boy, have I
There
noticed
you
that
go.
too. You're absolutely right. So, Will, in your previous campaign, you emphasized preserving Stewart's quaint, relaxed lifestyle. You just mentioned it earlier as well. Do you believe Stewart has moved further or closer away from that vision over the last 4 years?
I think because of individuals like Chris Collins, who came in and slammed the door shut on the face of these developers, these big Wall Street interests, which arguably could be why Senate Bill 180 was passed. All right. It went through Tallahassee. Now Tallahassee has opened the door to big developers. So I think it has been preserved. Obviously, you're always going to have this big pressure to come in here. And with the way the CRA is structured, it provides investment incentives for developers within the CRA, which is like downtown Stewart area,
Good.
amongst other areas. So there's always going to be this pressure pushing in. However, we have to be aware of that pressure and say, well, we want to try to maintain you don't want to cook off the goose that's laying the golden egg. Why does everybody love Stewart? Whether it be the downtown area or the small town feel. But now the water's boiling. The pressure of people, blood pressure is boiling, and the traffic that we're starting to see, we're kind of maxed out. There's no easy solution about traffic. So I think, thankfully, for guys like Chris Collins and then others that have held the line, we've really done a good job.
So, what mistakes, if any, do you believe the city leadership has made since your last campaign?
Well, I kind of briefly mentioned the one mistake is like don't say you're a slow growth candidate and then the pattern is there. It's not just the one. There's a couple other items that suggest that no, he's not really a slow growther. So that's a mistake on the current seat holder of seat number 1, Campbell Ridge. And there, I don't know if you're thinking of the way the manager was, the city manager, the legend Mike Martell, how that was handled. That might have been handled a little bit better, but I have to give him there. You might have that as a question, so I don't want to jump ahead too far. But I'll leave it at that. We'll come back to that if need
You
be.
got it. With the term slow growth, what specifically does that mean to you in terms of density, height, and then traffic thresholds, which you can't really control those much anymore?
Right. Well, some of the beauty of this area was the people had the foresight way before me to try to put in. They could see that this area is going to be a gem. I refer to it as kind of like little Hong Kong. Everybody wants to come here. People don't want to live in Miami. They don't want to live necessarily, too far north because you get frost and stuff. This is kind of like the last line, and Palm Beach has been developed. So we're it. I mean, Jupiter it was a beautiful town, and now it's been kind of overran to a certain extent. Still a nice place, don't get me wrong, but they're going to come. We're going to have 2 to 3 million people who want to live here. And these people knew it when they developed the 4-story height limit. And Senate bill provides a way for developers and the Wall Street interests to get around that. But we have done a good job of trying to keep it under control. That said, another mistake was made, I think, in that this hotel that's going to be built right here. Okay, it looks like it's going to be breaking ground pretty soon. It's going to be a 4.5-story unit, and the blueprints that I saw kind of makes it look like the sand crawler from Star Wars movie and the Jawas thing. It's
Well,
just this big,
let me interrupt
funny
you for
looking
one
building.
second. Which hotel are you talking about? There's one on US 1 that's proposed and then the one on Colorado.
The one on
Okay.
Colorado. Thanks for pointing that out. It's a great question or a great add on. So the Colorado hotel. So that's going to change the dynamic and the look. And then on top of that, the way they handle the parking there, that was another mistake, in my opinion. There's similar hotels, these little boutique hotels, not even boutique hotels. These nice, super nice hotel in Deadwood, South Dakota that I went to. Beautiful hotel, no parking. You had to literally walk a half mile to a mile down the road at this city-owned property, park there, and bring all your luggage up or whatever. So, like, who wants to do that? In this case, you don't have to walk that far. I guess you're going to use the parking next door, but still, if you don't have parking, you're going to have a problem.
Right.
And then if these people go there and they're like, "Oh, there's a big parking issues," are they going to want to return? Like, I will never stay at that hotel again, no matter, despite of how nice it was. It's just no, it's just inconvenient. So
And that's one thing too. How do you see the city of Stuart? I know, currently you go downtown and it's a lot of mom and pop businesses. It's the small boutiques, and it's what to me makes Stuart so special. That hotel is going to be a name brand hotel. It's not a boutique hotel anymore. So, what's your stance on the new businesses coming in? Should they remain boutique, mom and pop, focused on the small business owner, or are we going to start bringing in national chains?
yeah, the previous leadership of the county and the city in particular were very smart. They for the downtown area, they put in restrictions to keep these formula stores out. However, they left it open to where if a formula store is considered complementary to the current downtown, then they could be approved, and we could support that. And we just had a recent case of that where the Spice and Tea Exchange came in, and I was in support of that. And it eventually, the city commissioners passed that one. You may know or may not, but it got passed. And even though it's a formula store basically is you have to have, over a certain amount of stores, like a Starbucks or a Bojangles Chicken or a Popeyes, whatever. So you don't want Starbucks downtown necessarily. And there's already a couple formula stores there, Duffy and Kilwins, but they can complement the area. So ideally, you want to have the local mom and pop type operations spring up. But at the same time, if nobody's got a plan or nobody's willing to front the capital and set up a new operation, and then somebody from the outside comes in and they show a very good track record. And when I called up the corporate headquarters of Spice and Tea Exchange and talked to the people there, they all knew this couple and they all spoke very highly. And they were basically, there was no benefit that this particular couple was going to get from the corporate level. If anything, it was a hindrance. So you want to find these really good quality people if you can. If you're going to bring in an outsider, make sure they have this. Try to make sure they have the same mindset, and would complement the area. I think they can happen.
Very good. What do you believe are the three biggest problems facing the city of Stuart today?
Well, three biggest problems. I think number one, you have outside influences. If you like the city of Stuart, you can talk about X, Y, and Z, but it won't matter if you get bulldozed by the state. Let's say, for example, Senate Bill 180, I think is a huge one because it now opens the door to overdevelopment and the big Wall Street interest. And because of the Live Local Act or whatever, these other acts that have already passed. It enables these other Wall Street firms to have an advantage over our local developers. That's a huge one right there. Number two, second concern would be people buying into the idea of these transit oriented developments, TOD, which is the hot topic. These train station. There's a very good reason why Brightline wants that train station, that location. And if they get that train station, that location, then they could, in theory, build a tower there. They could build and within a 1 mile radius of where the hospital is at. They can go up to 7 stories based on Senate Bill, Senate Bill 102,
That's
I think.
correct. Yes.
So, and I'm like, do you really want a tower? Stacked up right there. And again, that ties into number one. So, but it's just the general unawareness of people or seeing the risk. Okay. They don't recognize the risk. And I get it. A lot of people want a train station, and train station, I have nothing against train stations per se. It's just, it would be nice to see that developer, private companies not try to tap into public funds so then they can destroy the place that they want to set up their transit oriented development, which includes high rises and walkable cities and all that. So we see that. The third would be as far as risks to the city. You could put it in two or three different options here, but I would just say traffic is a concern, and then you have other issues. You could say water quality, but there's also land issues. A resident was pointing out a potential dump site that's really kind of gone unchecked or unnoticed, or really hasn't been addressed as well as they would like, is on land. So you have, but that was one of the benefits that this past commission or previous commissions have done is they hired that environmental attorney, and she's pretty much on top of things. So get her to address any environmental issues for number three. So I guess environmental issues number three. Number two would be people not recognizing the risk and what these big Wall Street interests are interested in developing here. And then number one, the state's basically working in the interest of Wall Street, not for the residents of Stuart.
You mentioned the environmental attorney in the city, which is a recent hire, recent position. Do you agree with that hiring and creating that position?
Well, it's sad that we have to have that added expense. It's close to roughly $300,000 for all of our expenses all in. However, seeing the fishing degrade so bad and seeing the river just consistently gradually get worse, and then you have all these projects like they try to restore the oyster beds thinking that that's going to help clean up, but then they get wiped out. All the oysters get wiped out with the discharges and such. We kind of have to buck up, and we're going to have to kick in some coin and kick in as much forces as possible to help pressure those big forces that are allowing this to happen. And then she can also help. Well, and everybody could, but not just her. I want to throw it on her shoulders, but she can follow up with the government agencies that are supposed to be researching things. I know a couple of researchers, they were more into the citrus research, citrus canker and the greening and all the other things. But I asked them, I said, well, what about all the seagrass, especially in Herman's Bay area, right? You don't have the discharges flowing up all the way up to Herman's Bay. 20 years ago, my friend and I had this place called Snook Alley up there. We never caught a snook under 20 pounds, right?
Wow.
It was crazy. It was a fabulous spot. But the grass that used to be there all the time, the seagrass, gone, gone. And what happened to it? And the theory was, well, global warming or manatees are overgrazing. Well, okay, they weren't sure. Well, somebody needs to find out or come up with a better answer. Maybe there is. I haven't found it yet. So it's nice knowing that you have somebody who's going to dedicate their entire profession to tracking down these kind of things and then going after it. So hopefully that helps. I think that was a good hire.
Going to backtrack too on the transit oriented development or TOD. I don't know that people realize it, but before the new commission was able to basically stop that station in its tracks, the county had sent a letter to Brightline also giving an additional parcel of land besides where the train station is. It's over by the ball fields to Brightline for $1 a year for 80 years. And it was specifically earmarked for TOD, transit oriented development. So I appreciate you bringing that up. People just need to really realize what's going on behind the scenes. This was done quietly when it was when we blew it up in the public, the county just went quiet on it. So we don't know what's going on with that. But also, that also brings up the zoning in progress, the current commission instituted for East Stuart. Where do you stand on that zoning in progress? Was that a good move for the city in East Stuart, or do you feel they might have overstepped their bounds with that rezoning?
Well, I like first and foremost, I like freedom and people having the property rights as best as they can get it. Obviously, there's certain limits. If you're living in a city or if you're living next to a church, you shouldn't be able to open a strip club right next door to that. So there's some common sense. You can't always rely on people's moral judgment because they just may lack. They may not have the same morals as you. Let's put it that way. So, and I think the concern, in my opinion, would be you don't want overdevelopment, overcrowding. And this is already, there was a city commission meeting a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, where they pretty much opened the door to allow smaller units be built in the backyards of people's houses, which in theory would help the affordable housing issue. But it could, now that you have this one person granted that privilege, thinking, well, as an investor or developer, I'm thinking well, you should be able to, there's going to be a flood of investors looking at the area, buy up land, throw in a bunch of smaller units, and then out for affordable housing, and you can make some pretty good returns on that. So you have to be kind of careful. Also, a lot of these people have had their homes and the families for years, and if you start to overdevelop it and the land value around it starts to go up, you start to attract a lot of interest, and then as time goes by, you have gentrification take place, and they're aware of it. The residents of East Stewart are aware of it, so it's kind of not really a slippery slope, but you have to be careful with some of that zoning.
So did you support the zoning in progress changes?
Yes, I did. Well, I would have, and yes, I did, and I think because ultimately it would help protect and defend the current residents. Current residents. That's my opinion.
So going back to our three issues with Stuart, what makes you more qualified than your opponent to help solve these issues?
Well, number one, I'm honest. I'll tell you straight up, and it doesn't mean I'm always right, though. Okay, so I'm honest. He's a smart financial former financial advisor with Wells Fargo. He should have been able to see through that deal with Brightline. He was the one that mentioned the Brightline's owner, Fortress Capital, in a city commission meeting. And once I did the research on who they are, what they've done, they have a long track. Well, pretty well. Yeah, it's a long track record of how they operate. I think of them in a not so in a derogatory term would come to mind. Okay, so he didn't call him out. In fact, he supported moving forward with the train station.
Mhm.
So ultimately, our big difference is I'm about trying to preserve the quaint small town of Stuart, Florida, and I'm hearing what the residents want. They want to do the same. The current residents want to do the same. That's the big standout difference.
That's where voting matters, folks, for sure. This is why we're having
Yeah.
these discussions today. So you know who you have sitting in that seat that makes these decisions. And well, how should the city balance property rights with neighborhood preservation? This kind of piggybacks with the zip zoning that went on with East Stewart, but it could be in other areas of the city as well.
Well, that's a good question, and we have a good answer in the fact that there was a lot of discussion amongst East Stewart. East Stewart gets a lot of discussion. I was attended a couple of their meetings. People are talking, and a lot of the residents, well, several of the residents, they probably are looking for more residents to come in and provide their input. But a lot of those individuals are already involved. So, as a city commissioner, you want to get the residents involved. If you're talking about a specific neighborhood, you want to find out what they believe. And if they believe a certain way, you want to try to help accommodate them as best you can.
And that was something I'll say. I imagine you agree with the current commission. They actually went into the neighborhood to have a commission meeting to reach those folks instead of them making them come down to the commission chambers. And that's something you really don't see anymore. So, talk about being transparent. They really tried to get everybody's input as much as possible. So, hats off, and
Exactly.
hopefully that continues. Now, do you believe the state has taken away too much zoning? You've brought up the Live Local Act, SB 180. I think I know the answer, but let's just talk about it a little bit more. Do you think they've taken away too much zoning authority from local governments?
Yes. Short answer.
Okay. And should the city fight Tallahassee harder on local zoning control? As you know, they have joined the SB 180 lawsuit, and you said you did agree with that.
Since the city of Stewart is kind of a crown jewel and directly in the bullseye. And you can argue that Senate Bill 180 was created because of what Chris Collins, former Mayor Collins, was able to accomplish with the zoning in progress. He just slammed the door shut on development. And isn't it an interesting coincidence that just 2 weeks, the Senate bill passed, 180 passed, and they made it retroactive 2 weeks before Chris was elected. Just an interesting little coincidence. So that to me tells me, yeah, Tallahassee's got Stuart in their crosshairs. So yeah,
They
we
do,
really have to
and there's a lot of municipalities
stop
that
that.
have fought that across the state. Even, Fort Lauderdale came out and spoke out against it, and Orange County, Manatee County. This was a big impact, this SB 180.
Right. This is the enemy at the gates, and you best be prepared to defend yourself. And however, whatever it takes. People talk about whatever it takes to build a train station. Well, first, whatever it takes to stop these guys from coming and knocking out the local developers, knocking out the local moms and pop businesses,
Right,
because they will.
right, yes.
So
So what areas of Stewart do you believe are most vulnerable to overdevelopment?
Ironically, well, the CRA is structured in a way that creates this inner part of the city that's very valuable. So initially, the development is going to go there, and eventually, so the most vulnerable areas are actually outside the CRA, because as time goes by, and California has already recognized this, and you can use them as an example. They had 400 CRAs in California. All of them have been disbanded because they ran into the same problem. Because eventually, the numbers go exponential. See, because the way taxes work, no matter how great the idea is, you got to steal from one person to give it to somebody else. And right now, the way the CRA is structured is you steal from people outside the CRA and you give it to basically the people inside the CRA, kind of indirectly. How so? How is an indirect tax? Well, if you have any service, this is what California found too, like the police, fire, rescue, if they go outside the CRA funds cannot be used to help fund their operations. So the areas outside of the CRA eventually get overburdened. And then all the tax revenue outside the CRA starts to, as time goes by, it's like an exponential type of a ladder or chart, if you will. As time goes by, then those areas outside the CRA get overburdened, and then the maintenance and the qualities of service start to decline, and they just can't keep up. And you hit the wall, and then that's what happened in California. They hit the wall, and they're like, we got to shut it down because of the way the bigger picture of inflation and all that kicks in. And so that I would say the areas outside the CRA are at the greatest threat, which is kind of a contrarian point of view because the CRAs are developed to, in theory, help against slum and blight. Well, what ends up happening is the area outside starts to get neglected.
No, you bring up a really good point, and I'm glad you did. That is one of the things with the CRAs is it is the outside of the CRAs that are picking up those extra expenses for those services we rely on, public safety, fire department, what have you. So absolutely. Now, do you believe that taxpayers have been given enough transparency regarding the long-term cost and obligations that were tied to that station proposal?
I think, well, I think it's out there. Again, I don't know. I found enough. I would say yes, because I've been able to find enough. And then all you have to do is look, right? Just come and see, look at the facts, look at the information. Now, if you're really serious about it, and you just look. And a lot of people haven't looked. They just assume, I want a station. You don't. So you're a bad person. Well, not necessarily against the station. It's just who's going to pay for it. And then and then you go down the path of who your counterparty risk is. Okay, so if you're involved in investment, well, what's the risk of the counterparty? And in this case, you're dealing with a derogatory name here.
Right.
So it's like, you really want to get in bed with these people? Okay, and if you do that, then you don't be surprised you're going to need to see a doctor in the morning. So anyway, that's kind of where we're at.
And then just the final question about that, and we'll move on. Are you concerned at all about traffic stacking, parking, and the quality of life impacts near that station that's proposed? Because the county owns the land, that's why it's going in where behind the courthouse. The city doesn't have a say on the county's property. That's how it came about. But there hasn't been any traffic studies or anything, and traffic stacking is a real issue. And parking is what brought up this bombshell letter that Mayor Reed
Yeah.
disclosed this week.
Yes, it is definitely a problem. And, it was on your web page, one of your web pages where you posted, I think, on the 6th, May 6th, with that map of the zoning and the different parcels involved. And I'm looking at the parcels, and Yeah, and then the Brightline had requested to be developed to develop one of those parcels. Okay, and they can then use the Live Local Act to help them. I think it was the Live Local Act,
It was the height
whichever
limit.
Senate bill I
Mhm.
was looking at. Yeah, which allows them to basically not worry about parking. They don't have to have the same parking. Okay, so we're right back to that number one concern: Tallahassee and the big developers being able to just bulldoze their way, literally bulldoze their way into an area, stack up the parking. Who
Yep.
cares, right? Because it's all 15-minute cities. We're all going to walk there anyway. Nobody has
That's
cars.
TOD.
So let's just walk to the
Yep, that's
station. Right.
transit-oriented
It's the
development.
COD, transit oriented development. So, yes, it's a problem.
Bringing it back home, what is your philosophy regarding taxes and city spending?
My, lucky, stuttering there, but we're lucky to find this beautiful place. We have all these waterfront homes. These people pay, to me, extremely large amounts of cash, their own earnings for property taxes. Okay. It's not just the waterfront people, but it's everybody in general. I get that. And last year we had a surplus, a couple $1 million, I think. And then to the credit of the county commissioner or the city commissioners, not the county commissioner, the city commissioners in particular, it was Commissioner Collins, Commissioner Reed, Joby, and I believe Eula, they all supported lowering the millage rate. My opponent didn't. And they were able to lower the millage rate. They were able to hire four more
Mhm.
firefighters, basically, fire rescue guys. And we can do, fortunately, I believe we can sustain what needs to be done with the current millage rate. And we might even be able to cut a couple of extra spots that or find some places to where who knows, might even be able to do another tax cut. There's a lot of questions, of course, right now with do you really want to cut taxes? Because we don't know how the vote's going to go about, the vote in Tallahassee about the overall property taxes. But I think people are already paying more than their fair share. And we just need to recognize that we got to hold some of our services people accountable. That's the one of the nice things we have here in Stuart. Everybody I met that works for the city of Stuart, they're very accountable. I spoke to a couple of the firefighter fellows. They have the right mindset, in my opinion. They're not looking to gaff everybody. The police officers I speak to, there's some great people there. There's some work around in that area that with the leasing of vehicles and such. But yeah, I guess to answer your question, I would like to see the taxes kept where they're at and maybe even lowered.
Are there any current city projects you believe are unnecessary or too expensive?
Not that I'm well, okay. I think you might be thinking about the Guy Davis Park. Okay. The only I can think of is one of there's been a big controversy around should we have a skateboard park in there too, right? Well, that's just, you're talking about a $10 million project for a park, right? And this would be, I guess, the one. So one of them, and of course, the Brightline train station is like, which isn't that's not our bag, baby. But the Guy Davis Park is our bag, and $10 million for a park when there's other areas, and I get it, you want to help beautify the area, but there's an area, a parcel, and this a member of the Chamber of Commerce pointed this out to me and asked me the same kind of a similar question. She says, "This area is right nearby. It's laying there, just sitting there, kind of vacant. What's going on with it? We could be bringing in some kind of a business there." And I agree with her. So we could potentially be using funds a little bit better. I think this CRA has really three risks involved, and that would be one of them, kind of a conflict of interest, or where you get to, like, I don't want to call it pandering, but in a way you're pandering to a certain district, and where you could be working on developing a commercial property, which would then in turn bring in more tax revenue. The park's not going to bring in a whole lot of revenue, tax revenue at least. It will if you have tournaments and stuff that go on there on the ball fields, but if you had a big skater tournament, I don't think that's going to happen at the skate park. But yeah, I think the money could be better spent in that particular area. I'm not necessarily against the park. It's just a glaring example of, okay, are we misallocating funds? What are we trying to accomplish here with the CRA? Because it can easily be corrupted, I guess.
So
The
it
intent.
sounds like this would be probably an easy answer here. What would you audit or review first if you do get elected?
What would I
Audit or
audit or
review.
review?
Hmm.
Okay, that's a good question. I would like, well, we have really good, like, Panal, the Stewart City employee who works with the CRA. I think she does a really good job. She's very transparent. I love all the transparency. So where would I snoop around first? I guess is kind of the question. And I don't really, honestly, I don't have a target really. I think maybe because I looked at and I do have a couple of ideas, but I haven't really targeted them yet because the new finance people are brand new. I've spoken to both. They're basically just trying to keep their head above water. But I do have a few questions. I won't go there today because I don't have answers. Once I get answers, I'll go there. But I don't have anything particularly right now that I've confirmed is guttering.
Okay.
So
So, of course, one of the things you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, one of the biggest news stories outside of Brightline was the removal of the city manager, Mike Mortel. Now, there's still terms being thrown around that the city's in crisis. It's dysfunctional, and Mike Mortel has landed on his feet. He's now the court administrator, so he's moved on. But where do you stand on this? What is your insight? Do you agree with the removal of Mike Mortel? Do you agree with the process of it? And then the follow up question. I don't like to give three things at once, but I will this time. What do you think of the new city manager hire?
okay. First on Mike Marcel, he was always pleasant and nice to me. We actually chatted a couple of times and had some pretty good laughs. That's the kind of guy he was. The guy you could ask him any question and he can remember from 20 years ago, almost the exact detail. So a genius in many respects. Now, I also know that Commissioner Collins and in particular Commissioner Reed, they had friendships with him. And I think it took leadership on their part. This is not an example of a crisis. It takes leadership to recognize that there's a problem. And I've seen some evidence that there was a problem. And it wasn't just one thing. And then put your friendships aside and put the residents of Stuart ahead of those friendships. Now, they kind of did him a solid, if you will, where they fired him without cause. And I think that was good because you don't want to make it messy, especially an icon. It'd be like the New York Yankees, if you follow baseball, the big home run hitter is Aaron Judge. It'd be like the Yankees firing Aaron Judge in the middle of the season. Everybody's going to ask, what in the world? Okay. But then if you dig into some of the details, it just shows leadership on the part of that city commission that says, hey, there's smoke here. We found multiple problems, and a city manager ultimately serves at our discretion, and they could have fired him, probably you could argue with cause, but they chose not to. And they took a hit for that. People are like, what's going on? They don't know all the answers. Why would you do that? And I don't know. I'm not friends with Chris or Sean Reed. I am friendly with them. I will talk to them. If I call them or I ask them questions, they'll answer or show me information. And anyway, without going into details, I think they handled it about as good as or about as well as you could expect. And they've taken a black eye for it. But people really, if you dig into the details, if you come and see the details, it worked out okay because Mike Martell he's on his feet. He's got a good job. Great guy, still in the area. It's just unfortunate set of circumstances that developed. So it's probably a long answer. Sorry.
What do you think of the new hire?
New hire. Thanks. He seems like a good fellow. I met him once. Tried to put him on the spot at the CRB meeting this past week, and I think he'll do. I think he'll do fine. He seems to be a good spirit, and I think it'll be great.
So we talked about this a little bit before, but we'll go into a little more detail. Stuart brands itself as the sailfish capital of the world, as you had mentioned. Do you believe enough is being done to protect the river and estuary from the city?
There's only so much we can do. I think we're doing. We have the foot on the accelerator. We're not hitting the brakes. We're going as fast toward that fire as possible. We have that environmental attorney now, and ultimately, though, you have big powers and big forces involved. You have the Army Corps of Engineers. You have, some would argue, Big Sugar, but ultimately, actually, believe it or not, the Big Sugar pollution is probably just a minor fraction of the problem. A lot of it's coming from up north, and then also from the river. Some of it's coming from local sources, and they won't talk about it. Okay, so it's I'm thinking in particular golf courses and the hundreds of tons of fertilizer and stuff that they put on there that they need to run these world-class golf course operations. Yet the average person who's paying through the nose on property taxes can't put more than 5 pounds of fertilizer on their grass. Okay. But these other guys who pander to the elites and the golfing world, and I don't know how many golf courses there are in the area exactly. There's a lot, and a lot of them are near the water or on the water, and all that runoff when the heavy rains, the summer comes, it blows right off. It comes in here. So you can't put all the blame on Big Sugar. Not that I'm necessarily a big supporter of Big Sugar, but I think we're yeah. Sorry, we elaborated, but to get back to your point, yeah,
Good.
we're doing a good job.
So, another topic that's really big right now is homelessness. It's become a growing issue throughout the Treasure Coast. What should Stewart's role be in addressing it?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. A couple of things come to mind. Okay, to answer the question though, try to get involved with this or encourage. Say to there's multiple agencies, nonprofits that are in this area. I think this area probably has more nonprofits than per capita than any place in the country. So it's pretty high. So you have all these agencies. Encourage them to come speak on their behalf. We have the CRA there, they have funds. Maybe we could develop a program to help some of these, redirect funds if they're available from the CRA into that kind of a thing. Obviously, I mentioned earlier about the CRA. We should be using funds to try to develop commerce and things of that nature to bring in good paying jobs. And then amongst the other things that the CRA has done is many, many good things that Pinnell has really put together. And she's a great grant bloodhound. She'll find it. But get these people involved and know we're available, know we have an open ear. And put them up. And that's a beautiful thing about a small town. Everybody can kind of networks. They already do for a large extent. And maybe if we keep property taxes lower, people with the funds that are well to do, the on the water types, they'll be willing to write the check for these agencies to try to help out.
Working
So
through the nonprofits. And well, we're winding down here. I'll just have a few more questions for you, but I've been peppering away at you, and I appreciate your time here this morning. You're giving residents a really good insight of who you are and how you think. What would you do differently to improve public trust in city government?
what would I do differently for public trust? They've done the current commission, I think, has done a pretty good job. I think one area that might be a concern is a little bit of aggressiveness toward each other on the board, members of the board. At times, I think people are like, what is this, a clown show up there or whatever?" You might have heard some of the comments, and I've heard this from several people. So I know when I hear it from more than 5 or 10 people, and in my world, I don't necessarily. I'm kind of an unknown. I got to admit, I got to be honest. I live in a cave. I don't come out very often, so people really don't know me. But when I do get out of the cave, I go out and talk to different people, and we talk about if we start talking about the city of Stewart, I hear a consistent theme. It's like, so I think I would bring back a more of I don't know, a diplomatic approach, maybe would be the word. So, this caveman, this troglodyte here is capable of being diplomatic. So, yes, that's kind of where
Okay.
I'm at.
And then would you consider yourself more aligned with a limited government or an activist government?
Limited,
Easy answer.
limited.
Easy answer. This is a good question coming up. What current commissioner or commissioner that has been here since January 1st, so it could be a past commissioner, what do you most closely align yourself with philosophically?
Maybe Sean Reed, was current commissioner, city commissioner. I would say maybe Sean Reed because I love the research he does. So when he was the guy that brought it up about the city manager, I'm like, this guy does a lot of research. He's on to something. That's why when I contacted him, he threw me just some things to look at. All he says, come and see. I looked at it and I'm like, ooh, yeah. So he and I line up a lot. I like Chris Collins. Chris is kind of I think his background was in UCF or UFC fighting or something. He's a boxer or something. So we have a little bit of a different approach. But as far as many other things, I think we align. I mean, when he was elected to 4 years ago, he did two things that I wanted to do, and he got them done. And this guy gets them done. So I respect. He's a guy that gets things done. Not that Sean doesn't, and not that Laura or Eula or even Campbell Rich does, but Chris is the guy that stands out. You got a problem? This guy's going to fix it. And he's very smart and borderline genius in some respects. And he's very righteous. He's very driven. And that's leaders. You need leaders to take charge. So, but I'm kind of more aligned with Sean. So I guess in that perspective.
Okay. What's one position you hold that might surprise voters?
One position that I hold that might surprise voters, as far as the city in general, that's a good question. No, because I always think that people think like I do, or on that same mindset. But I guess it goes to that point you just asked. I'm about free government. Like, okay, here you go. Chickens. We just the CRB had this week the idea of chickens in people's backyards come up, and and it was actually my opponent. Well, not my potential opponent. He hasn't announced yet. Campbell Ridge, who I saw at a meeting on Thursday. As I'm walking out, he says chickens because I voted for chickens. I supported that idea of having chickens in backyards. So yeah, maybe it surprises people that I'm kind of less government. I understand the concerns or what the progressives intend to bring and their mindset. In fact, Judge Clarence Thomas had a great interview 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago at the University of Texas. Everybody should look at that, and where he identifies the progressive mindset and how it's opposite of what the Constitution stands for. So that might surprise people. I don't know.
Okay.
Chicken.
Absolutely. It's going to be a fun topic to follow again. If elected, what does success look like in 4 years for you?
Success from 4 years from now, if elected, what does success look like 4 years from now? A bunch of people that are happy that Stuart doesn't have 4-story buildings all around the downtown area. Like we saw the one big unit that got built, and people were like, and people, you could just see it was like their life got sucked out of them, and it was disappointing for a lot of people. And they're like, well, this is the sign of things to come. And it's like losing somebody or a place that you love, and you just don't want to lose it. Like I think back all the fishing holes I had
Yeah.
that were great, and they're gone. Ugh.
So,
So yeah, 4 years from now, if the fishing returns, that'd be ideal. But ideally, people being happy about Stewart staying Stewart.
do you see a train station behind the courthouse in 4 years?
Boy, that's not going away because either FEC is going to eat that fish, the smaller fish, because it's a dog eat dog world, and you're talking about big players
Yeah.
now. This is big money. These are the ones that people need to be aware of. So that train station is not going away. So whoever it brings forward, I know Brightline says, "Well, we're going to push forward with it." FEC is like, "Good luck," and FEC is in a lawsuit currently with
Yes.
Brightline. But if FEC pushes back too much against this TOD, the transit oriented development, which I'm sure they won't, they'll try to develop a station to do the TOD themselves. But if they do push back, they'll be eaten by Norfolk Southern or CSX or some other bigger fish.
So with what is going on with the city and the Mike Martell and all this issue, there's definitely been, two sets of residents. It's almost like a lot of the issues have broken down to the pro train station people versus not station people. So what's your message to the residents who feel disconnected from local government?
Well, get involved. Number one message is if you feel disconnected, and at one time, living in a cave here, I felt kind of disconnected, right? Like and you could probably walk out on the streets and talk to 10 people and ask, well, who's the mayor of Stewart? 9 out of 10 probably couldn't tell you,
Right.
right? So there's a big disconnect. And then you look at even who shows up to vote. There's what, 19,000 people in the city of Stewart. You get what, 5,000? So maybe 25% turnout. So there's a big disconnect. So, maybe that would be another program to where the city of Stewart really needs to motivate or somehow try to foster that your voice matters. It does. You get people more involved, and that would be, I guess, my point or my answer on that question.
4 years ago, you
Okay.
asked voters for trust, but were not elected. Why should people vote for you now over your opponent, Campbell Rich?
Simply, if you want slow growth, if you want to protect against the big multi-residential, multi-story developments, I'm kind of that guy. If you want this place to look like Delray or Fort Lauderdale, I'm not your guy. Don't vote for me. But if you like Stewart the way it is, if you live here in Stewart because you like a small town or like the semi-small town now, we have everything that the big cities have within 15 minutes. But if you like the current fill, I'm your guy. You really should consider, I wouldn't say you would need to, but you almost kind of need to vote for me because there's a pattern that my potential opponent has that says he is not slow growth, even though he's put on a billboard and went around on his campaign signs and even said it himself he was slow growth. The pattern says he's not. So, yeah, there you go. That sums it
Check
up.
that
If
voting
you want slow
record.
growth, yeah, if you want slow growth, exercise your will. Vote for Will Laughlin.
Right.
So, yeah.
And Will
So
Laughlin, Group 1, City of Stewart. Will, how can people reach you, support your campaign? They want to find out more about you. Do you have a website or anything like that?
I do have a website. We're just getting it off the ground a little bit. So there's still some mods. If you hop on there today, it'll probably change. That Laughlin.com. And then you have probably the easiest one is Facebook, Will Laughlin for Stewart City Commissioner, Group 1. That one more. It's easy. A lot of people interact very quickly with either comments and things, and I follow that regularly. And then I have a number. My phone number is posted. You can always give me a phone call as well. So those are probably your best sites. And then you can email me at willofstuart@gmail.com. So there's that too.
Well, fantastic. Remember, folks, that we are going to be voting for the City of Stuart seats in August. This does not get decided in November. It will get decided in August. So make sure you get out there to vote. Will Laughlin, it has been just a real pleasure to get to know you. I think we've learned a lot here today. And thank you for being on the show. And don't forget, folks, follow the Casey Ingram Show on Facebook and subscribe on YouTube for more real talk you won't hear anywhere else. I'm Casey Ingram. Stay informed, stay engaged, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.